Looks like we have about 35, 30-ish people on, so we can get started. Thank you everyone so much for joining today. Just to let you all know, my name is Karina Perez. I'm one of the co-founders of the fellowship, and I'm just here to kick us off. I wanted to say a big thank you to AdAstra in helping us put this together, and to Sarah for running today's session. So this is really to help you all on acing that interview. And then if anybody has any questions throughout this process, there is a chat function that you can put in your questions, comments in there. And then at the end, Sarah will kind of call through those and make sure that everyone's questions are being answered. And again, we want to thank our friends at Astra so much for helping us get this together and give you all the tools necessary during your interview process. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sarah and Hunter.
Hi, everybody. So yes, as Karina mentioned, my name is Sarah. I'm so excited to be here. I'll do a better introduction in just a moment. But Hunter is my colleague here as well. Hunter, do you want to wave to everybody?
Hi, everybody.
Yeah. And we are so excited to be here. So yes, today's topic is interviewing and how to ace an interview. Karina and I were actually talking before everyone joined the meeting about how you can do a lot of interviewing and it still be a little bit of an uncomfortable thing. And so I want to encourage and validate you if you've ever felt uncomfortable in an interview or about the idea of one. That is something that is largely inevitable, but we're going to talk today about how to actually use that to your advantage. Nerves are not a bad thing in this world. So more specifically, what are we going to be talking about today? You'll see me referencing a second screen here. I'm still looking at the presentation, but essentially I want to start off after a quick introduction of who I am by talking about securing the interview. How do you get the interview in the first place? How do you stand out across a sea of candidates? Then we'll talk about preparation for an interview. Once you actually have the interview, how do you make sure you're ready for it? Once you're in the interview, how do you then ace it? Perhaps the most important. We'll talk about interview follow-up as well. I did review questions that you submitted beforehand. If you did participate in that, thank you so much. And I will be incorporating those things into our conversation today. There were a couple that didn't neatly fit into categories I've defined, so I'm going to touch on those at the end. And then, as well as Karina mentioned, if you have questions as we're going through, you're welcome to send them to the chat. I can't guarantee I'll get to every question, but I will certainly try. So without further ado, friends, let's get started. Like I've said, my name is Sarah Stake. I'm a talent and brand advisor for a company called AdAstra Talent Advisors. And we specialize in highly technical and executive headhunting for new space and clean tech organizations. So we do consulting on hiring practices, interviewing, and the actual recruiting to fill these difficult to fill roles. And if you're wondering, well, Sarah, why are you qualified to talk about interviewing? I've been interviewing professionally for almost 10 years now. I've held roles like recruiter, headhunter, talent acquisition manager, hiring manager, and have seen interviews from different perspectives, different content, and I'll be incorporating everything that I've learned over that time in our conversation today so that you get the insights you need to make this valuable. At Astra, like I mentioned, highly technical and executive roles. We deal with mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, software engineers, and a variety of other things. And aerospace, which I know is close to all of you, is something that we very much so focus on, given the overlap with new space and the safety critical, mission critical criteria that we're looking for. So I will be focusing on a lens of more engineering and incorporate as much aerospace best practices in our conversation today as well. Again, I want to make sure this is most relevant. Okay, so our first section is securing the interview. And there are a few things that I want to highlight here. So first and foremost, making sure your materials are in line and excellent. is going to support your process and your branding here. So LinkedIn profile, I have a little diagram here. If the text is too small to read on your laptop, don't worry about it. I just want to call attention to a few different categories here because especially if you're applying to jobs through LinkedIn, which I highly encourage you to do, having your profile prepared is almost like a personal website that you can host for free is an excellent way of doing it. So having a professional background image is great. You can easily Google LinkedIn background images and get things in the right pixels. But having something clear, ideally relevant to your interests and the right size so it's not really pixelated is a great visual representation, the first thing that somebody sees when they come to your page. Also with the headshot, the photo of you, I would definitely recommend veering away from cropping yourself out of an existing photo from like the reception at a wedding. I bet you looked phenomenal, but we probably don't want to use that cropped photo here. If you don't have a professional headshot, don't worry about it. I would recommend going out with a buddy on a cloudy day, using portrait mode on a phone and taking a picture from just beneath the shoulders up in semi-professional dress. Of course, especially in an industry like aerospace, we can be a lot more flexible there, but something that looks nice is really powerful. Also in your headline, which will default to your current role or internship if you don't specify otherwise, is a great place to indicate what you're interested in. So seeking this type of opportunity or student building skills in something, truly like a tagline for your brand, but what kind of stage do you want to set when people visit your profile? I highly recommend thinking through how you want to tell your story. And this is relevant when somebody says, oh, tell me about yourself, which is not my favorite interview question. It's so broad. I don't personally use it, but you will hear that sprinkled throughout interviews throughout your life, I'm pretty sure. So it's good to be aware of what that, let's call it an elevator pitch, looks like, right? So thinking through the story of when you first started school, like what were your ambitions? What were your interests? How did that develop over time? Why are you interested in a specific kind of job or discipline? Why is aerospace something that matters to you, right? And really tying in meaning there and creating a cohesive story. Stories stick with people. And when we're talking about securing an interview, standing out and breaking through the sea of applicants is key. And this is one great way to do it. I would definitely recommend filling out activity and experience as well. But the things we talked about are definitely the most important. Beyond LinkedIn profile, resume. So I've been asked a lot, is a one-page resume the way to go, or is that kind of old school thinking? Honestly, I think it's still the way to go in almost all circumstances. There will be exceptions to that, but if I'm being frank, I do believe a one-page resume is almost always the right move. And when you're submitting that resume to employers, potential employers, we want that PDF format. We do not want Word, and we want it titled in a way that's like your name, resume, year, something simple. Sometimes candidates will create different versions of their resumes, which I actually do recommend. We'll talk about that in a moment. But they'll title them in a way that makes it obvious they have different versions. And we just don't want to give the employer an impression that that resume was designed for something other than that role, right? We want it to feel special. And so, yeah, keep the title clean, PDF file format for sure. And then depending on your discipline, sometimes this is relevant in aerospace or related fields, a portfolio or even work samples prepared can be really helpful. Now, sometimes with intellectual property, NDAs, we cannot do this based on the work that we've done, and that's okay. This is not critical. But if you're a software engineer, for instance, having a GitHub profile as a portfolio to demonstrate some of the work that you've done, that can be pretty powerful. So something to keep in the back of your mind, not mandatory. And the last point here, we really talked about this in the LinkedIn section, but understanding how you want to tell your story and we really want to tap into that inspiration, right? Your own inspiration, and then how you relay that to others to indicate your excitement. I would literally practice this story in the mirror or with a friend, and it's gonna feel a little bit funny. It'll feel a little awkward, but in my experience, it's more awkward jumping into it without having practiced. It can feel a little clunky. So think about what you're studying, what you're interested in. If you have key experiences as well, like if you had a very impactful and relevant internship, maybe throw a line in there about it. Don't focus on details in this elevator pitch, which would also go in the about section of a LinkedIn profile, if I hadn't made that connection yet. Definitely worth spending a little bit of time on. Okay, so I want to revisit the resume. And if you are like many candidates I've spoken to, you're not just applying for one job. There's probably going to be many. And in fact, because of the nature of the market, it's smart to not have all of your eggs in one basket. Now, all of that to say, I think that customizing your resources for the top jobs that you're interested in is really, really smart. And what I mean by that is maybe you have a generic version of your resume that does not have one specific focus or emphasis necessarily. It's more a general coverage of what you've done, what you've studied. But then you find a job that you're extremely excited about. You'll likely want to take a look at the job description and begin aligning keywords. We're definitely like staying honest here. I'm not saying copy keywords over that aren't relevant, because that'll come back to bite you for sure. But keywords that you notice on the job description, even sometimes the website, but largely the job description, if they're relevant to you, I would recommend using the same verbiage that they are. For instance, maybe a job says they'd like experience with full cycle electrical design. And in your materials, you had written cradle to grave electrical design. I would observe that and switch. The reason why keywords matter here, they also matter on LinkedIn as well, is because different resume screening technologies or different keyword searches on LinkedIn are pretty black and white. Sometimes synonyms are considered, but if you're applying to a large company, for instance, that has resume screening before human eyes ever see the resume, you might be disqualified by not using the right words. And so that's one of the reasons why, again, observing how things are being worded and incorporating that into your own materials, very important. Also, hierarchy of information is another interesting one. So in a job description, it's common for things to be listed from most to least important. There are exceptions to that. So you do need to look at it with a bit of a critical eye to make sure it makes sense. But if you can, you want to get an idea of the hierarchy of importance of information and sort of match that on your resume as well. This becomes really relevant when you're looking at bullet points and how they're ordered, for instance. Make sure you're hitting on the most important things first. You have probably heard before that recruiters look through a lot of resumes, hiring managers as well. And so it's not uncommon for a resume to get maybe 30 seconds, which is a little heartbreaking because we spend so much time on these and they have so much important information. I promise, though, that time is going to be well served because the resume will be looked at in more and more detail as the process goes on, and those keywords are critical, like we've talked about. But at the end of the day, just understanding that somebody is probably going to skim this. Maybe they'll go back and read it in more detail, but how do I get the most bang for my buck knowing that a skim is going to happen, and really leveraging, again, keywords and hierarchy of information. We talked about the single page piece, but I will just throw it out there one more time for fun. Definitely recommend one page on a resume. Okay, so a couple of the questions submitted prior to the webinar, and thank you so much again if you submitted a question, was, should I be reaching out to people in the company in addition to or even instead of applying? My answer is heck yes. Absolutely. Networking is so important. Kind of tying it back again to this idea of how do I in a sea of good candidates, right? There are a lot of good people out there, and how do I stand out? This is one of the best ways. And so I have a screenshot here on my slide. I looked up entry-level engineering position on LinkedIn, and I opened one of the jobs that popped up. This is, if you click into a LinkedIn job, what you will see at the top. Maybe you're familiar with this, maybe you're not. But what I really wanted to draw attention to is, do you see right here, Mary Scriven, meet the hiring team? And so recruiters have a choice whether or not to publicly tie their profiles to a LinkedIn job. I'd say maybe half of the time that happens. And so I highly recommend, even if you're not applying to the job on LinkedIn, I highly recommend looking up the job on LinkedIn to see if there is a recruiter or hiring manager publicly tied to the job, like there is in the screenshot. And if that's the case, let's get shameless. Let's message them. This is something that, you know, even recently I opened up my own job on LinkedIn and I got a lot of applicants. We're currently growing the AdAstra team. And I'm talking like 1,000 applicants in 2 weeks. And it was not feasible to look through everyone. And so there were a few things that I did to tackle that. But one of the ways I prioritized applicants is people who reached out directly to me, right? And a simple personalized message. Hi, my name is Sarah. I recently submitted my resume to XYZ job. Here's one reason I think I could be a valuable addition to the company. Would love to hear back. Let me know if you have any questions. You know, something super simple, the touch point and the persistence, which is going to feel a little bit uncomfortable sometimes. Maybe some of you are like, ooh, messaging the recruiter is kind of scary. One thing that's scarier that I just highly recommend doing anyways is, if you don't hear back, messaging them again. Do it one more time, maybe in 3-4 days. That is the kind of persistence. And you stay professional, right? You're not going to be messaging them like literally every day, but having the grit, I suppose, to follow up again is something that can really differentiate candidates. It doesn't mean it's going to get you the job every time, but that kind of attitude and persistence is a quality in a job seeker that goes a long way. I want to talk a little bit more about networking and researching, because what if the recruiter did not tie their profile to the job description and you don't know who is running the search? Well, there are a couple of things you can do. And we're going to be talking about LinkedIn here again as well. LinkedIn is such an awesome tool as a candidate or an employer. It's an important one to be at least familiar with on a high level. So over here, when you open LinkedIn, if you logged in right now, you'd see a search bar in the top left-hand corner, and you can type company names in there. You can type a variety of different things, job titles, individuals, companies. But in this case, if the recruiter did not tie their profile to the job and we're looking for contacts within a company, we can type the company name in here. And then there are all these interesting filters down here. You can say, yes, I want to see people at SpaceX instead of the SpaceX company page. You can even go to the connections section and say, I want to see people I'm connected with on a first and second hand basis. Maybe you know somebody at SpaceX that you didn't realize, you know, an old friend now works there, and you have an opportunity to say, hey, would you mind making an introduction for me? That can be very powerful. Another way of doing this is going to the company page itself. So again, typing in SpaceX in the search bar, going to the company page, and there's a people tab where you can search for keywords. So maybe you look at recruiters or talent acquisition, and those are great ways to find profiles. Now, if you were in this situation, you're applying to the SpaceX role but could not find the recruiter on the job description, don't be afraid to message a recruiter at SpaceX. I do recommend also applying. I don't recommend doing this in place of an application, because probably what's going to happen is that employee then tells their talent acquisition department, hey, I just got a message from so-and-so who said they applied. And even if it's not like a referral style sort of thing, even if they're not like, hey, you need to hire this person right away, the simple act of bringing up your name and drawing attention to your application is a win. So you can message recruiters, you can message hiring or just managers in departments or areas that you're interested in. All of that is effective. So yeah, I definitely challenge you to reach out to somebody in the organization beyond submitting that application. But I do think submitting the application as well or in tandem is a win. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how to get the interview. And now we've graduated to a point where we got the interview. We have the interview on the calendar, and now it's a matter of making sure that we are ready for that interview. So let's talk through some cool preparation strategies. I'm sure you've heard it a million times if you've ever listened to any sort of interviewing tips, but researching the company is critical. Understanding not only what they do, which is important, why it matters, and what their mission and values are on their journey to accomplish these things. And so if it is an aerospace company, for instance, let's say it's a drone startup that's creating a group of drones that will fly together and communicate unmanned, essentially, and they are working to keep free airspaces free. You want to understand as much as you can about those drones. You want to understand what's listed on the website, articles that have come up as well. Really smart to Google the company that you're interviewing with. And again, understanding like what they do, why they're doing it, and whether or not that aligns with your own values, right? It's really great for sustainability of happiness to choose companies whose values align with your own. I was given this example a long time ago when I was learning to interview myself, but essentially if someone who believes animals should not be kept in captivity is applying for a zookeeper position, even if they do extremely well in the interviews and get the job, they're probably not going to be happy in a sustained way in that position. And so value alignment is so important. In terms of news as well, I mentioned Googling the company. Definitely a good idea to bring up positive news. You know, you want to keep it enthusiastic and upbeat as much as possible. Not that it's not within your rights to ask if you look them up and see news about a failed test or mission. It's not that you can't ask about that, but you will elicit more excitement from the interviewer if you're focusing on positive wins. And so maybe they reached a huge milestone in funding or development. That would be a very cool thing to know so that you can bring up and weave into the conversation during the interview. Also very smart to research the people that are actually interviewing you. Now, you won't always have the first and last name of your interviewer, but if you do, look them up if you know how much I love LinkedIn, you're going to know, I'm going to say LinkedIn, look them up on LinkedIn. You can Google them as well, but ultimately understanding their background and their tenure at the company, what they actually do at the company, can be great for comments passively made throughout the call, or even more actively for questions at the end of the interview. That's another thing that we'll talk about in this conversation today. So you know the company, you know your interviewers. One other thing that's super important is having a reliable interview spot and technology. So one time in my senior year of college, I was interviewing for a position and I knew that it had to be really quiet because I would need to focus a lot, high focus conversation. And I thought, well, I'll take my car to the parking lot beneath the library where it'll be totally silent. And I did that, and a few minutes before the call realized I didn't have a strong enough connection in the garage. So my equipment was working, I had a good spot, but my technology was not prepared. So luckily I was able to figure it out in time, but Also things like opening Zoom, as all of you did today. You know how sometimes Zoom will force updates before it will actually let you in a meeting. If you're doing a video meeting, super smart to check and make sure that you have all appropriate updates. So yeah, highly recommend that. Your service is good, whether it's phone or internet connection, all important things. More on preparing for the job interview itself. So familiarity with the job description is important. Now, if this is one of the jobs that, remember we talked about earlier, you've identified it as a high priority, you've probably customized your resume and your resources to match the job description of it. In that case, you're probably quite familiar with the job description. Either way, I would give it another read, and a lot of your preparation should be focused around the description itself. We talked about hierarchy earlier, understanding what is the most important aspects of this job description and how do I relate most closely to them. And so thinking through the keywords and related examples, but even more broadly, I really like coming up with interview answers categorically. And so I'll come up with primary pillars or categories, and I'll think of different experiences of mine that I could filter under each. So for example, accomplishments. A lot of different questions can touch on this category, like what is your most proud accomplishment, or what is the most difficult thing you've achieved in the last year. But yeah, thinking through maybe 3 things you've accomplished and why they were a big deal. One of the questions I got prior to the presentation was, how do I talk about my skills without sounding like I'm bragging? And I don't think you should be worried about bragging. Honestly, I think this is the time to highlight your value and your shine. And you don't want to take credit for other people's work. You know, when you're referencing group style work, it's great to say we in certain circumstances, but then also make it clear what you specifically did. That can be an important thing. So anyways, I went on a bit of a tangent there, but categorically accomplishments, also problem solving. When have you encountered a hurdle or a difficult thing in a project, in an internship? And what did you do about it? I would think of a few examples there, because again, a lot of behavioral questions will kind of funnel into that category, and you'll have a few different examples to choose from if 2 different questions throughout the interview touch on the same category. Definitely would come up with a mistake or a failure as well. That is a common interview question. Talk to me about a time you failed and how you handled it. And so there's like a recruiting joke, you know, what's your greatest weakness? That I care too much. Or, you know, when people try to make the weakness sound positive or the failure sound positive, the way to do that best, in my opinion, is be accountable for the failure. Probably choose something that wasn't like a huge critical failure, but something that you take accountability for, and then articulate how you learned from it. Because mistakes are important. They are the foundation of learning, and good companies will understand that too. But yeah, it's something to think through. And you may also do some research about your specific field and common questions for roles that you specifically are interviewing for. But yeah, very much so recommend the category system, thinking of examples that relate to that category, and then having a bank of things to choose from when you're asked questions during an interview. Similar to my recommendation about practicing your elevator pitch or your about me, tell me about yourself, I definitely recommend practicing some key interview answers as well. And it's going to feel silly and it's going to be worth it, I swear. It really helps to force yourself to put the words together. Okay, so acing the interview. In our imaginary scenario, you have secured the interview, you have prepared for the interview using the things we just discussed, and now it is interview time. So what are some things you can do at the start of an interview to really stand out and set the right tone? demonstrate passion, right? Show that you are excited. And let's say you are not like a loud, smiley person naturally. I'm not saying you need to manufacture an extroverted personality in order to make a good impression, but I would find the energy within yourself as much as it can feel authentic, right? Why am I actually excited about being here? Why do I add value to this company? Why is this exciting? And kind of harness that. And definitely a smile is helpful. Being authentic, again, back to this idea of like manufacturing a personality, you do not want to do that. You want to bring out the sparkle in a way that feels genuine. It is okay to let your personality show through. In fact, it's better because if it's a good fit, it's going to stand out in a very positive way. And you know, with this idea of sustainability of a job too, you want to set expectations that, hey, this is me and this is who I am, and have that be a key factor in why they love you. Punctuality, you know, I'm preaching to the choir, I'm sure, but being able to be on time and show respect for the interview's time by doing so. It's a classic. Even early is great when it's possible. If it's a video interview, for instance, logging on a few minutes early and being there when the interview shows up, that can go a long way. Also focused. So showing up as focused and demonstrating that you're focused comes largely down to practicing some of those opening lines, right? Being able to articulate who you are and why you're there in a way that's clean and smooth. And practicing also helps the delivery be more natural, which sounds a little counterintuitive because if you're saying your elevator pitch in a mirror, yeah, it's going to feel kind of weird, but it gives you the tools to make it so much more natural when it comes time to deliver it verbally. And there will be some nerves involved, right? That's just how this goes. And if you've ever given like a class presentation or done an interview yourself, you know that nerves can sometimes change the way you think or speak a little bit. And so do your future self a favor by not relying on your ability to come up with things on the spot. Let some of that be rehearsed. Okay, so I want to talk about the way that we answer questions. I would not be surprised if some of you or many of you have heard about the STAR method for answering behavioral questions. And this may be redundant, but behavioral questions are essentially questions about a time you did a thing, right? They're based on wanting to hear a story from your past experiences that demonstrates your skill or ability in a specific area. And the STAR method of answering behavioral questions got very famous and has remained famous because it is so effective. And basically what this means is you want to delineate the situation at hand to start. So tell me about a time when you ran into a difficult situation and had to come up with a solution. Situation is setting the stage. You don't want to give like 2 minutes of context. It's best to keep this as brief as you can without cutting out any critical information. So it may be a sentence or two. It may be a sentence or two where you are setting the stage and helping the individual understand what was the problem that came up in this example. And then task is going to be a great time to articulate what was the task at hand? What were you tasked with in that situation? So let's say a problem comes up and you as the testing lead are responsible for diagnosing the problem. That diagnostics would be the task at hand. Action is what you specifically did in order to address the situation. And so it's really awesome to add a couple notes on your thought process here, helping someone understand how you thought through what actions to take and then what you ultimately did to address the situation. And then lastly, our result. This is the most commonly overlooked step, but it's so important because you want to show everybody how the story ended. And it's really powerful if you can have a result that demonstrates you were able to effectively address what you set out to in that situation. So if you can add quantitative data here, amazing. You do not have to, but really being able to explain what happened after all of this, right? If we're looking at a problem came up and I had to solve it, example, was it solved, right? And did you receive any good feedback, or did that affect the business positively in other ways, helping to recontextualize? So yeah, highly recommend as you're planning out your answers and then delivering them in the interview to use a STAR structure. It's also okay to say, did I answer your question? If you are completing your answer and you're not sure if you completely hit the mark with what they were looking for, don't be afraid to just directly ask. That is absolutely fine. And clear communication is something that's respected by many companies as well. I want to talk a little bit more about answers. So transferability. Let's say you don't have a ton of experience in an area that is being discussed. That is okay. I recommend taking your most similar experience and using that and helping the interview understand why it's similar. Let's say there's a coding language they're asking about, and you don't know that specific coding language. However, a language you are familiar with overlaps with the other in these ways. Great opportunity to share that and explain some of that overlap as well. Taking responsibility, honesty, and accountability. I know I touched on this when we were talking about how to answer the tell me about a mistake you made or a failure you had question, but I'll re-emphasize it just because I'd say a pitfall in interviews is when candidates start trying to justify, like there's some nerves at play about, oh, I don't want it to seem that way, and basically creating ways of making it seem less bad during the conversation. I would not go too far down that rabbit hole, right? Own it and lean in and really retain that accountability. It shows confidence and it shows strength, and that's a powerful way to stand out. Another thing that I see decently often is kind of this me versus you language. And what I mean by that is sometimes candidates talk about why a job would benefit them and why it's in line with their career goals, which those are awesome things. Like, in order to be long-term happy and successful at a company, we need those things to be aligned. However, it's really smart to put your marketing hat on when you're expressing your interest and think more about how you could benefit the company. Really switching that verbiage can be powerful, because if a company interprets you as interested in joining them mainly for your own benefit, that could potentially be a deterrent. So no problem with talking about why this interests you and is good for you, but always make sure you're tying in here's the value I could bring to the company. Here is the way I add differentiated value to your mission. Those can be really important ways to stand out. Okay, compensation is a bit of a tricky one because some companies list it, some companies don't. Some recruiters get squirmy when you ask them about it. Some are forthcoming about it. So there's a decent amount of variance under this topic, but I want to validate you all that money is important, and it shouldn't be the main motivation, right? Ideally, you're interested in the company because of what you could accomplish and not just how much money you would make, but money is still important. And so you are well within your rights to ask about compensation. We just want to do it strategically. And I will make a quick comment too. When I think about compensation, there's kind of the total compensation figure that includes things like benefits, base salary, bonus or equity. And then there are different components of that compensation, right? Maybe at a larger company, you're more likely to have a bonus portion. At a startup, more likely to have equity. There's big range there, but I would recommend thinking about compensation as a total package. But in terms of verbiage on how to broach the subject, I have a couple lines written on the screen here, but I will read it out loud because this is a good one. I'm so excited about this opportunity and the team. I can see opportunities for me to solve hard problems and add value to the organization. Well, a great fit is most important to me. There's no denying that money matters. I want to be respectful of your valuable time. Do you have a compensation range available for this position so I can make sure we're aligned moving forward? So I think this is a respectful way to ask. Again, you are within your rights to ask, and it is an important piece of the decision. But in this example, this candidate's doing an awesome job of emphasizing I'm interested, and my interest is what's most important. However, money also matters. And so that's a really good way to position this question and topics about compensation. Alrighty, so at the end of an interview, you definitely want to have questions prepared. Always, that is a great thing. And yes, they are for your own curiosity. They're also to demonstrate things about you, right? There is definitely a perception piece where the questions that you ask will help form the interviewer's perception of you. And so it's great to ask about the role, for instance, what characteristics will the best candidate for this role have? Or how is success defined in this role? Things like that are awesome. Ideally, you don't ask anything that's laid out clearly on the job description, though. It's great to ask about things that are not clear on the job description. It just shows that we were prepared and read all that and are now asking kind of beyond the scope of the information we have access to. Asking about the company or even the interviewer themselves. Psychology says that people typically enjoy talking about their successes. And so giving the interviewer an opportunity to briefly touch on that is a great idea. Your questions demonstrate thoughtfulness. And so things like how much research did you do? Did you put time into crafting questions prior to the conversation? All of those things are valuable. If you did in your research find something cool in the news, like a big accomplishment, this would be a great time to ask about it as well. I wrote positive tone here because sometimes I've observed interviewers with candidates and hiring managers where the candidate, in an effort to demonstrate their research, is getting right on the line of where it seems kind of interrogating, and we want to keep the tone positive to leave the best impression. And so it doesn't need to be butterflies and rainbows positive. It can still be authentic and actually meaningful, but I would just recommend keeping a positive tone to keep the feelings and the sentiment a bit lighter. Yep. Okay, and then reiterating interest, showing appreciation for their time. This is a huge one. So at the close of the interview, after you've asked your questions, saying, hey, I just really want to thank you for taking the time to have this conversation with me. I very much appreciate it and look forward to next steps in the process. Having some sort of closing line like that shows them, yep, you're definitely interested. Because sometimes interviewers leave a conversation not knowing for sure after learning more about the company, how interested is this person? So it's great to remove any guesswork and set the tone. Additionally, seeking clarity on next steps is a great thing. And so if they haven't already offered, hey, here's what you can expect, Cody, in the next steps of the process, very much so appropriate to ask. That could even be one of your questions. Can you help me understand next steps in this process? Not a bad idea to get a timeline as well. Within what time frame might I hear back, just so that your expectations are set correctly. It can really not feel good if it's 2 weeks after an interview and you haven't heard anything. Now, and I will say, unfortunately, it is possible that you do everything right and you do all of this well and you don't hear back. It's really a best practice on the company side to communicate, and it's also not always what happens. And so I really recommend committing to yourself the best you can, not to get discouraged. Some of this is going to be a bit of a numbers game, and interviewing with companies that you're not completely sure are the right fit, to learn, right, to be open to them being the right fit, but also to give yourself a bit of practice. That is okay. I wouldn't waste companies' time by completely going willy-nilly on that, but I think there's absolutely space for conversations where you're not sure it's quite right, but you're open to learning and want the reps. Reps are so important. Returning back to the how you end an interview effectively point, there's one other thing I want to mention. Getting email addresses from individuals that you spoke with is great because it allows you to follow up on the interview, which I recommend doing every single time. There might be more than one interviewer, especially if we're looking at like an on-site visit, maybe later in the process. I recommend sending a separate message to every single person you spoke with, if you can. Sometimes that might be like 8 if you're on an intense panel interview. So do what you can, but it is a really great idea. And I have a quick template here. Thanks again for taking the time to meet with me yesterday. I enjoyed our conversation about the XYZ position and appreciated learning more about XYZ, maybe the team's work or this year's goals or whatever. It sounds like a rewarding role, especially given the opportunity for beep bop boop. You're kind of focusing on the opportunity for me to solve problems and help the company, kind of company focused language. But then it's also okay to reiterate, I think my education, degree, experience make me a great candidate for this role. And at the end, I look forward to next steps or discussing the opportunity. Let me know if you have any questions, need any additional information. Something as simple as this goes a long way. Back in the day, a handwritten thank you note was preferred. Most hiring managers I know prefer an email follow-up. But pick up on nuances. Sometimes you'll speak to a person and get a feeling, and that's okay to follow too. But that's, I'd say 9 times out of 10, a really appropriate and even preferred way of following up on an interview. One thing that I think will be really good for us to talk about is this idea that companies are more open to taking what I'd call chances on a candidate if they see high potential. What does taking a chance mean? It means you don't have all of the necessary experience, but you have high potential. So things like showing enthusiasm about the work, that passion piece, so important. Demonstrating things like you can learn quickly or pick up new topics quickly. You are nimble, you're agile. You take initiative, right? Times when you haven't been told to solve a problem or do something cool, but you did it anyways. Really phenomenal. Eagerness to learn and contribute, positive attitude, and then also able to own both individual work and collaboration. You can be trusted to execute on something individually, and you can also work really effectively in the group. I got a question in the chat. Should I do follow-up? Even though the interview told me approximate day they should be reaching out? Excellent question. And yes, the answer is yes. In that case, just thank them for their time and say you look forward to hearing back. Something really simple. But some interviewers are specifically looking out for a touch point and will, I don't know, for lack of a better phrase, hold it against a candidate if they do not send a follow-up. So just to make sure you're covered on all bases, yes, great question. Okay, so there were a couple of questions as well that were sent beforehand that I don't think, yeah, you're welcome, that I don't think I touched upon clearly in our discussion today. So I wanted to revisit those and make sure we were comprehensive. So one of the questions was, what's the best way to prepare for a technical interview for a fellowship if you're in your freshman year and haven't taken required courses? My answer to this is really leaning into the transferable skill piece that we talked about today, and understanding if I haven't taken all of the courses I need to, why am I still worth taking that, again, quote unquote, chance on? I don't think they're actually taking a chance on you, because I bet you're phenomenal. But if they don't have full information, they'll see it as such. And then also at the end of the day, if there are cold, hard requirements, that is something to consider as well. But if there's any flexibility, and don't undercut yourself, right? One of my friends who's starting a business recently told me, my goal over the next 3 months is to be told no as many times as possible, because I'm tired of being the one to limit myself. If I get a no, at least I tried and I could get some feedback. And I thought that was a beautiful perspective to share. Okay, how do you talk about your experience being a leader without coming off as bragging? Ooh, do not worry about coming off as bragging unless you sound totally arrogant. But it's okay to say, I have accomplished this and I'm really proud of this. Specifically a leadership capacity. Maybe it's something along the lines of, I had the opportunity to take a leadership role in this group project situation. I was excited about that. Here's how it went. That's totally fine to say. And you don't want to like shy away from saying you accomplished something. Just own it, and then give other people involved the thanks that they deserve as well. Okay, what's the best way to talk about leadership experience if you weren't directly involved with solving a technical challenge? It was more on program, project manager, systems level. In this case, I would think about the problem, the solving technical challenges aspects that you were involved in. So for instance, if you're in a group as the leader and the team is going through development of some sort of tech, and they encounter a problem, they might go to you as the lead to say, hey, we encountered this problem. And or maybe you're setting out the strategy or helping define how work is split up. All of those things are contributions to solving a technical challenge for sure. So just kind of switching the way that you're thinking about it and understanding, like, yeah, I very much so contributed to the end solution going well. And here are the ways I did that, and then owning that, because the leadership aspect is super important. Okay, Allie, should I send a follow-up regarding their decision if they told me the feedback in a week and have not heard back yet? Yes. Yep, I totally would. I think that's a great idea to be persistent with follow-up. And it'll feel a little uncomfortable sometimes, but some of these recruiters are so busy and maybe even understaffed, it could genuinely be a mistake that they have not gotten back to you. It won't always expedite the final result, but it's a great, and it shows initiative too. If they say, we'll be back in touch in a week, you haven't heard back in a week, hey, I'm still really interested. You don't necessarily say, when will I hear back? But you just want to remind them that, hi, I'm here and I'm interested. So, hi, thank you again. Looking forward to hearing the decision, hearing feedback, whatever it may be, is a great check-in. Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, my friends. So we have 3 minutes left. If there are any other, ooh, where will the recording be? That's a great question. James, let me look into that for you. And I'll have Cody follow up if we're making the recording available, which I believe we are. So hang tight. Anything
Yeah,
else?
we should send a follow-up email once we cut it down and everything to people.
Oh, perfect. Karina, are you recording on your end as well, or would that be our recorded version?
I believe once it hit record, I'll go to my back end, but I'll double check.
Perfect. Okay, great. I see a couple other cool questions coming in. We have 2 minutes. I'll see what I can do. If you have a higher up connection at the org you're applying for, should you CC them? Yeah, it might be seen as going over the interviewer's head. I would definitely separately reach out to the higher level connection, and you're welcome to mention the name in your message to the recruiter, but I would avoid CCing just in case it rubs somebody the wrong way. What are some technical questions I should expect, at least in general? Okay. A lot of it's probably going to be about past projects and then kind of peeling from there about your involvement and understanding of aspects of those projects. If you designed something, how much of the design cycle did you own? And there are so many other tech questions for specific disciplines. Yeah, Alexis, my short version answer, I know that wasn't super thorough, but hopefully that helps a little bit. Should you ask the interviewer about their role in the company? Well, ideally, we already know that because we've researched them, but absolutely. How have you been so successful in this organization? Ooh, excellent question. How can I go from a good interviewee to a great interviewee? Enthusiasm and preparation. That research is really going to make you stand out, and having a clear understanding of your past experiences and how closely they relate to the most important things about this job. That alone is going to separate you from so many other people. Oh my gosh, you're so welcome. Thank you for being here. What should never be said in an interview? If you Google illegal things to say in an interview, there's a whole bunch of good ones there. Oh my gosh, and I had some other fun ones for you, but we are at time, my friends. It sounds like AdAstra and Zed Factor are going to partner again, so please keep an eye out for my name in your email. It was such a pleasure being with you today. Thank you so much.